Underway. Everybody ready back there? My name's Tom Boysen. I'm the moderator here today, and we're talking about teacher evaluation and national tests. I'm going to make a very brief introduction of the panel members. I want to give them as much time as possible to interact with one another, and our goals here today are really to make clear what the underlying issues are. The stakes are very, very high, as we'll see in some of these slides, and to reveal to be heading generally for a consensus, which would include things we agree upon and also things that we don't agree upon that we need to get to. Starting off, on my right is Yvonne Chan, who is an amazing educator who created the Vaughn Learning Center over the last 20 years. And she'll tell us a little bit about its characteristics, but it has done a magnificent job of educating students from disadvantaged backgrounds to really the highest standards, and in order to get there has had to be innovative on a number of fronts, one set of which are what I'll call teacher effectiveness programs and systems. And then on my far right is Jason Culbertson, who's the Chief Learning Officer of the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. And he too started out as a teacher and then came into a teacher effectiveness system where he was a mentor teacher, a master teacher. Then he ran that program for the state of South Carolina. And lately he has been Chief Learning Officer for the National Institute. So he's very familiar with the landscape and the picture across the country. On my left is Patrice Pujol, who is the Superintendent of Schools in the Ascension Parish School District in Louisiana. It's really between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, about 21,000 students, again, quite a challenged population. And she started out as a teacher and was a high school principal at one time, which I think is the hardest job in education. I always, when I was a school superintendent, thought, wow, I'm lucky I'm not a high school principal anymore. That is a hard job. And has done wonderfully innovative things. Warren Fletcher, on my far left, is the president of the United Teachers of Los Angeles and is himself a former English teacher. And UTLA and the school district are really on the cusp of they have an agreement on the implementation of a teacher effectiveness system. And I'm going to ask him to explain what its elements are and its origins in a minute. But let me start with Yvonne. Well, let me start with my slides first, because they've been playing up there, and that's what I learned from Madeline Hunter, is there's something called an anticipatory set. So I wanted to get you guys thinking about it right away. So the first slide is just, can we flip to, I guess it'd be number 2. I'm just going to step right through them. There we go. So we have probably in the last 10 or 15 years had a better idea of what matters to students. And it's very interesting to me if you go back to like 1966 and the Coleman Report, and it really had the finding that that what schools do really do not matter. It does not matter that much. That it's really all about the social class background of the family. And I think for maybe about 10 years there, we kind of gave up on having a big impact until researchers began to show us that really what was going on in schools, the effectiveness of the school, and then later that moved to the effectiveness of the teacher. The next slide is showing us, just in practical terms, if you take 2 kids at the 50th percentile in year 1, and then one of them has highly effective teachers for 2 years, the other one has not very effective teachers for 2 years, that's where they end up 2 years later. One of them is at the 90th percentile, one is at the 37th percentile. Next slide is really about, if you compare what's being spent, the more money and salaries doesn't alone produce better student achievement. Next slide, a lot of the money in the teacher compensation expenditure is spent on a salary schedule which rewards years of service and degrees. And neither one of those things is very well related to teacher effectiveness. The next slide is just going to show us about the amount of turnover that we have in our system. So it's very, very expensive to be educating people, inducting them into the profession, and then losing them. And we're sort of in a class by ourselves. Next slide is talking about what's the economic impact of having a highly value-added teacher. And this is showing us it's about $250,000 per classroom in the lifetime income of the students who go through there. Next slide is just showing us that if you look at the first column, the teachers who have been in the profession for 1 to 10 years have more favorable attitudes about these changes than those that are more senior. I suppose this is not surprising. And then the next slide is showing us the states that are involved in what's called the Common Core State Standards, and assessments are coming down in 2014 and 2015. And this is a movement which goes way back to the 70s when the National Assessment of Educational Progress was created. But if you show the next slide, it will show you why we need to do this, because we have states that have the green lines are the state assessment systems, and you can see that they're showing a prettier picture than the kind of gold lines, which are National Assessment of Educational Progress. So there's been a kind of inflation-adjusted achievement for states. So part of the reason for having state standards and assessments is to get more truth in education reporting out there, so the political process, parents, et cetera, can react. There is beginning to set in a kind of political reaction. I heard this referred to the other day as Obamacare. We have Obamacare in the medical profession. Bill Bennett, who was the Secretary of Education during the Reagan administration, or part of it at least, said here last year when he was on a panel that he was trying to move in this direction, but there was one political party that he could not get to say national, and another one that he could not get to say testing. So now this is the voluntary national standards, and there are 2 groups that are putting them out. I think there are 26 states in one, and the balance are in another. Some states are in both. And the final slide that I want to show is really going to the point of how effectively can we measure teaching. And the Gates Foundation came out in January with a report. I think they spent, $45 million over 3 or 4 years looking at all of the data and the ways that people use. And they said, to answer the question, can we effectively measure teaching? Yes. What should we be looking at? And these are the things: test score growth, student feedback, and the multiple observations of practice against a very clear rubric. So the standards are not a surprise to anybody. So that's kind of the prelude of what we're going to talk about here. And Yvonne, I'd like you to talk about what now. Yvonne has been a teacher and in LAUSD years ago, and a principal before the charter schools were permitted. And then she got, I think, the first transition charter school conversion, yeah, in the cosmos.
In the cosmos.
In the cosmos, right. And she's grown that thing, so it's fabulous. And I think her account of what she's done at the Vaughn Center will be a good foundation for all of us. So please.
Well, good morning. How many of you work in schools? How many are teachers before? How many are your parents? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think we can capture your attention a little bit better this way. So anyway, it's really a pleasure being here. And not only I want to share with you, definitely success stories after 20 years, but challenges that we have faced and still facing. And I hope that together, maybe we can really have some action item that's a win-win situation. So the story started in slide, is it 21? 21? So 1997, after 4 years being a independent charter school authorized by Los Angeles Unified in the heart area, Pacoima, right here, not far, we figure out, now we're all union members. I belong to union too. There are 9 unions on site. We say, look, we really need to do something. And with 3 goals in mind. Now, how can we have a comprehensive teacher evaluation system, which later on become a staff, everybody's in there, okay, that will support standard-based instruction because the standards rolled out. And we said, how can we align that? And also strengthen the teamwork because we're out there in Pacoima alone. We don't belong to the district with the support from our organization as well from the district. We have to recognize that. Especially in 1997, you know, conversion charters unheard of. We can't even go to any professional development that kind of feel that we're included. And then thirdly, honestly, you know, now, this is a tough to staff school. I got there 3 years before conversion. Attrition rate of teachers 60%. I lost 60% each year, and 50% had no teaching credential. In those days, they called it emergency credentials, right? In those days, don't even have interns. That's total historic days. So how can we do that and retain teachers? So it's really the charter status, but still within the system, still unionized, kind of push us to that. Now, next slide. Okay, now let's add this dilemma on. Okay, so at that time, it's only an elementary school, not pre-K through 12, 1 campus. We need a comprehensive system that will allow the consistent and periodic, at least 3-4 times a year, observation of teaching skills, knowledge and skills that you stand up and deliver, you know, with multi-dimension. Well, why we need that? I do not mean to demean, anything, because I've been the school principal in Los Angeles Unified a couple of times. So here was, I remember, the STAL Act gave us this one piece of evaluation. So right here, I just borrowed it. It was a yes, no, and needs to improve. Principals, we fold this up so we don't see the no and needs to improve. We only see the yes. That's number 1, shorten the instrument. Because look, there's so many teachers, hard to staff, it's hard to do it. And then down here is all the narratives. No, we don't have time to write narratives, right? And one-time walkthrough, so most of them are pretty subjective, so we fold that over. It's only yes, 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 right? So you're down to what? A 10-minute walkthrough? Now, emergency credential, we're supposed to do it twice a year. Veterans teachers, once every 3 years. So down to the bottom, you're only down to an instrument like this, and where you just sign your name. And if there's time, you'll conference with the teachers. So usually you don't have time, and this is terrible, terrible. You put in the mailbox, you know, and have them sign. And then as a teacher before, I remember my great principal just gave me the paper a year later and say sign it because we have to file it. But anyway, okay. So from how we go from there to standard-based, 20 different dimensions with observable behavior, very objective, developed by teachers together, and also has all the rubrics. So you know what a 3 is and how you go from a 3 to a 4. There's a very clear expectation based on, for us, is a professional standard in Charlotte Danielson's. Then with that, now, teamwork, especially now from preschool through high school. Well, how are you going to apply that to preschool? How are you going to apply that to PE teachers? No testing, right? How you apply that to special ed teacher who support? So we have to develop this teamwork. So everybody will concentrate on literacy, academic English. 85% of my 3,000 kids are English learners. 100% Title I, student with disability, graduation rate. How we do this so that preschool teachers also responsible for graduation, and high school teacher responsible for preschool academic English. Thirdly, how can we do this also, this individual incentive, not as much about the money part, but how you link it for professional growth. So the time spent for yourself to do self-evaluation, reflection, which we never let the teachers have evaluate themselves, and peer review, and administrator. And at the end, yes, put enough money there to really make the difference. Now, I'm going to just stop right there because that's the system that now working that includes all the certificate staff, preschool through high school, subjects not tested, includes psychologist, counselor, nurse, resource specialist, includes all the administrators on that system. And we still have Kings, but we've been on that system since 1997 and aligned pretty well with TAP 2.
So one thing, Yvonne, I think, I'm not sure it's in a slide, but you talked about, or some number, the performance pay aspect of your system could be up to $15,000 a year?
Correct.
Is that correct?
And the same administrator get the same as a preschool teacher, get the same as a nurse, get the same.
So that's a very significant reward. Let me invite Warren Fletcher to address this. Warren, as I said earlier, is the president of the United Teachers of Los Angeles. I think there are like 40,000 teachers in LA.
35 at this point.
Pardon me?
35,000.
35,000, and so they are really on the cusp of implementing a system in a very, let's say, politically volatile context here.
Indeed.
So maybe you could talk to us about how you got to where you are and sort of best case, what good could come out of this?
Well, first, you did say that we had 40,000 members, which would have been true about 4 or 5 years ago. Here in California, we've had across the state so many layoffs of teachers throughout the state because of the budget cuts and the recession. So teachers are doing more with more students in every class with fewer resources, and I wanted to make sure that's how we went from 40 to 35.
That's right.
And we're
Thank you. That's a very
We're
good
hoping to lower class size at some point in the near future. But
yeah, and just as a practical point, I have a friend who teaches biology in one of the high schools, and she has like 40 kids per class in her biology. So, I mean, for some of us who were teaching in the good old days when there were like 25, that is like a very big difference.
Well, in a lab science class, when you start getting over 40 and 50 kids, we start worrying about a school getting blown up just out of the chemistry class. So, but that was just a preface. Now, you had asked about our recent evaluation agreement, and when we were talking before the session. There was a court case brought here in California. As Yvonne said, we have a law here called the STULL, S-T-U-L-L law, which is the teacher evaluation system. And a lawsuit was brought against LA Unified stating that although the state law says that student achievement data, test scores, actually specifically what we call our CST, our California Standards Test data, has to play a role in teacher evaluation, the lawsuit said that LAUSD was not consistently doing so, was not consistently incorporating that element. And so went before a judge, and the petitioners in that case, Doe versus Dacey, the petitioners had asked that a value-added system where you take, and I assume everyone here is familiar with value-added test systems, that a value-added system that would weigh student test, CST test data as 30% of a teacher, that would just be 30% of a teacher's evaluation. And that would be not dissimilar to the systems that exist in Louisiana, in New York, in Illinois, where state legislatures have designated or have mandated that teacher evaluation, a specific percentage, 30%, 40%, 50%, be based on the statewide student test data. Here in California, we're very fortunate in that the governor and the legislature, while saying in the law that test data needs to play a role in the evaluation process, didn't designate a specific percent. Speaking as an educator in California, that gave us a lot more room to craft an outcome that wasn't a cookie-cutter outcome. But, so this was brought before the court, and the judge found, on one hand, that yes, indeed, LAUSD was not utilizing test score data LAUSD was using test score data inconsistently throughout the teacher evaluation process, but the judge didn't say, therefore, I order that this VAM system be put in place. the judge said, since California has a collective bargaining law that says that evaluation systems need to be something that are developed jointly by the teachers and by the school districts, by the superintendents in the school districts, he sent UTLA and LAUSD to the bargaining table. And Tom had a great saying for it. He referred to it as a shotgun marriage. So we basically, the judge gave us 6 months to devise a system that met the standard of incorporating test score data into the teacher evaluation process. We had LAUSD, meaning the district, and UTLA came at it with very different mindsets about what that would look like, and we had 6 months to get it done. One of the things I would say is that when we came into this bargaining, when we came and sat down with Superintendent Dacey and with the leadership of LAUSD, we approached it as teachers. And since everyone here is familiar with what a VAM score, a value-added score, is, I'd like to describe it this way, because it's the way I've described it to groups of teachers who during the bargaining asked how it was going. I am an English teacher, although I have taught algebra, and algebra is a very good way to illustrate this. Now, under a value-added system, if I was invited by my principal at the beginning of the school year, Warren, you're going to be evaluated this year. Okay. Well, we see that you have a VAM score. Your students have grown by a factor of 4.3, and that's not enough. We want your students to grow by a factor of at least 4.9. You can go now, Warren. I have learned absolutely nothing about what I need to do or what my shortcomings are or what my strengths are. And the system we set forth to devise was a system where I come in now, okay, let's hit the reset button. I'm that same algebra teacher. I come in and my principal says, okay, you're being evaluated, Warren, and we can see that over the last 3 years, your students, you're an algebra teacher, your students on quadratic equation, they've done real well. Your students on factoring have done real well. But your students on graphing, graphing stuff, graphing equations, for the last 3 years, they've consistently come in where their scores are consistently lower, and we've checked it against the math department to make sure this isn't something that's happening at the whole school. So Warren, we have found that a place where you can improve, a place where we can kind of coach you up, is how you teach graphing. And we're going to provide you the supports in order for you to be able to improve on teaching graphing. And so during the year, in addition to being observed, in addition to all the other elements, my principal is expected to get me assistance from teachers in my department who are strong at graphing, if we want to bring in Professor Algebra from the local university or whatever. The idea is to actually make it into a system where it's credible to teachers in that if I'm told, here's what the data show and here's where you need to improve, I want to improve. I want to be a better teacher, and I believe that we teachers all believe that data has its place. But now I'd like you to, again, interpose that first version, which is under a value-added system, when evaluation is based on those sorts of, you have a 4.2, you need to get a 4.9. The education leader at the school, the principal, has no roadmap as to how to assist the teacher to improve. And we came into this bargaining, into what you call the shotgun marriage bargaining. We came into that bargaining with the goal of complying with the state law, but doing so in a way that was about improving instruction, because every teacher is interested in improving instruction. And when we had before the panel, when we were all talking, I made sure I didn't use up all of my good lines. And one of them is, if you have a weak 4th grade teacher, all of the parents of those kids in the 4th grade class, they're very concerned. But let me tell you who's really concerned. All of the 5th grade teachers at that school. We understand that we as a community of teachers need to be about improving the entirety of the practice and the entirety of the educational experience. And I'm going to add one last thing, because I know you're doing your little time move there, which is I looked at, according to slide 11, you may recall it, accurate evaluation systems require measurements of test score growth, student feedback, and multiple observations of practice. Absolutely multiple observations of practice. There is one thing that's an absolute necessity. Now, I have been on panels with Yvonne before, and she's a real smart person. And I'm not going to be able to pull anything over on her. I figured that out. But I want to make sure that when I'm being evaluated, whether she's my principal or she's someone else coming in, that the evaluator has been calibrated. And that's something we've pushed very hard for in UTLA.
Right.
That I have a Dilbert comic in my office, where, you know, the boss, the guy with the pointy hair, he says, we're going to do a 360 evaluation. No matter what you say, won't matter. You can say whatever you want. It's only based on the quality of your work. At which point the intern ASOC says, as a boss, you're manipulative and insane. At which point the boss says, the quality of your work just went way down. And we need to make sure that we're accurately measuring. We need to make sure that, by the way, if Yvonne were my principal, she has to be part of my evaluation, because she's going to tell you whether I show up on time, whether I play well with others, whether I'm a constructive part of the educational community. But we have to make sure that when we're talking about educational outcomes and we're talking about observing educational outcomes, that it is a system that's clean. And the last ad, test score growth. I'm going to go back to the days when I taught algebra. I know how to do this on the California Standards Test. It's something I would never do. But there are two ways to teach exponents, you know, the little powers numbers, right? Now, if I want all of my students in my algebra class to score well on exponents on the CST, on the California Standards Test, I can achieve that in one period, fifth period, one day. I walk them through, and I say, if you see the little number and it says this minus sign, do a plus. My students could end that lesson with no understanding of exponents whatsoever, but they would score perfectly on the CST segment on exponents. And when they went to algebra, or rather when they went to geometry, algebra 2, and trigonometry, they would have no clue what they were doing, because I would not have taught them exponents, and I would not have taught them exponential factors. You need to be very careful that we do not devise a system that creates an incentive, because now I'm going to switch back to being an English teacher. As an English teacher, there are two pillars of what I have to do in teaching. One is I have to teach writing, and the other is I have to teach literature. I don't teach literature so that the students can find out what happened to Becky Thatcher and Huck and everybody. I don't teach it for that reason. We teach literature because it's the single best way to teach students how to process complex written material, and to do it regularly and to do it in different settings. If I am told that my pay or even my ability to stay in the profession is going to be tied to my students' test scores, the amount of teaching complex writing is going to go down. The amount of teaching complex reading and complex material is going to go down. And I'm going to do a lot more assigning students a 5-paragraph essay and asking them what the topic sentence of the third paragraph is. And by the way, the last ad is, I did a panel with Superintendent Dacey. This was right after I'd become UTLA president. And I gave this little speech. I said, and you know, what'll happen is it'll go down. And I said, and let me tell you, as an English teacher, if you're going to tell me my pay is going to be cut unless I cheapen the educational experience of my students, you go ahead and cut my pay. The next day at the union, everyone said, now that you're president, you can't talk that way anymore. But speaking as an English teacher, you get my point.
Yeah, so. Thank you very much, Warren. Patrice, you have been a leader at various levels, including high school principal and superintendent, and somehow you decided to pick this initiative of, I'm going to call it a teacher effectiveness system, and so tell us a little about that choice and then what you did with it and what results you've got.
Sure. Ascension Parish is a county school system. We have some very affluent schools and we have some very impoverished schools. My high priority is that we would close that disparate gap between performance in our impoverished schools and our affluent schools. And obviously, to do that, a teacher effectiveness system is essential. We began what we called our turnaround zone with 8 schools, started working through some reform models in a couple of schools to start with, actually building on Jason's work, using the TAP system for improvement in a couple of schools, grew that to our 8-school turnaround zone model. And we have what the focus is, that we want to create an environment in which teachers can do their absolute best work and produce great student outcomes. That environment has to be such that teacher professionalism is protected. It has to be such that many of the things that we spoke about earlier, that Yvonne was talking about, we have to have a clear, delineated set of practices. Here are the things that are great practice in a classroom. And this is what it looks like on the high end, this is what it looks like in the middle, and this is what it looks like on the low end, and that be clearly delineated. The other thing I would say that is very important is that teachers have to be getting feedback to refine their practice all of the time. And that certainly student outcomes has to be a part of that, but not one time at the end of the year. But we should be tracking student outcomes in a teacher's classroom weekly, monthly, quarterly, so that we can give feedback on how is each individual student doing and what are the teacher's next steps in pushing the envelope for mastery of high standards for every individual student. And that's a very different way than looking at it than just at the end of the year, I'm going to check to see what your value added was, and we're going to evaluate you that way. It has to be an ongoing process. The other thing I think that is important that hasn't been talked about yet is the role of teacher leaders in this process. To think that the principal is going to provide all of the feedback to teachers, I think is flawed. Teacher leaders play an absolute role in providing feedback to other teachers. And in my district, we went from using this instructional rubric and this approach in our 8 turnaround zone schools and scaled that district-wide to all 28 schools. And of my 1,400 teachers, 500 are trained evaluators in this instructional rubric and routinely do peer observations and give feedback to other teachers. And that is a part of teacher evaluation coupled with the principal feedback. And so I think when you engage teachers in the process, that it elevates the entire profession. It provides buy-in from everyone that this is indeed important and doable, and that peer-to-peer feedback, I think, is the most powerful feedback that we get. Interestingly, that the Met study talked about using student feedback because that's kind of our next step. We are trying to think now about how can we use student survey data, student survey results also to inform teacher practice. But I think that if we are going to be successful in teacher effectiveness systems, that it is critical that we are creating cultures and environments in which teachers are motivated and inspired to do their best work. Because what happens if you have teachers collaborating around student work, student results, transparently looking at one another's classroom results, then the ineffective teacher, it becomes very clear. When you have more and more effective teachers, the ineffective teachers really are revealed. And there is a professional pressure to improve or to make some other career decisions. And not that there's not an HRN part that has to come on the back end of that. Certainly there are some ineffective teachers that we need to have either get better or leave the profession. But we're not going to fire or evaluate ourselves to success. You can't divorce the feedback and the evaluation piece from the refinement of practice and the collaboration around what are the next best steps for teachers to provide for individual kids' success in the classroom. And so those two pieces have to be married in any effective system. And that is what indeed we are trying to do. I don't like the term teacher evaluation as much as I like the term teacher effectiveness or even systems for student success, because at the end of the day, it all has to be about how do we have every child master rigorous standards, and how do we measure a child's progress on the continuum towards that mastery. And so we're continually having to diagnose and determine next steps towards that mastery. And if that's not the work of the entire school, we're not going to get where we need to be.
Great. Jason, as Chief Learning Officer of the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching, you have perspective across the country, hundreds of schools, and hundreds of thousands of students. And I think your slides are going to take us kind of through some structural things which will kind of bring to mind what the elements of this might look like, as well as what you've learned from what you're doing.
Sure. If we could get slide 16. Let's talk about ideal educator evaluation or educator effectiveness models. And as you can see here, in the bottom left quadrant, instructionally focused accountability, that's essentially the teacher evaluation or educator evaluation. But one thing that we found is that, similar to studies done 5 or 6 years ago in performance pay, that performance pay in a vacuum is not effective. Very similar, educator evaluation in a vacuum is not very effective. So if you look at some of the other components of this system, the TAP system, you'll see the idea of multiple career paths. In other words, teacher leaders, masters and mentor teachers, and this is something that Patrice alluded to a moment ago, of when you think about getting observed, but also having coaching feedback to improve. Sometimes, and this is not meant to be disparaging toward principals at all, but sometimes principals haven't taught a class in a decade or more. But so they may not be the best ones to provide how can the 12th grade calculus teacher do a more effective job in providing academic feedback to the students, or et cetera. So one of the things that we've done in TAP is try to take this idea of evaluation, but put a level of teacher leadership around that. The other piece, if you look into the upper right-hand quadrant of this slide, is the idea of ongoing and applied professional growth. So the other piece of this is, and our rubric is on a 1 to 5 scale, but if you were to score, say, a 3 on the rubric on a 1 to 5 scale, that's not the end point. It's not, well, here are your scores, okay, good luck, and we'll try again next time. But each week, the teachers are engaged in professional development during the school day that's completely aligned to that rubric. So not only are they being evaluated by the rubric, but there's a weekly opportunity to get instruction on the rubric, modeling by, again, going back to the career ladder of these master teachers, mentor teachers, and to make improvements in that process. So again, I would say that that's ideal. If we could go to slide 18 for a moment. One of the things I'd like to point out about this slide is the difference between the TAP observation shown here in blue versus other observations shown in this orange-red color. And if you look, this comes, by the way, from the New Teacher Project's Widget Effect Study, which many of you are probably familiar with. But to see these observations in orange that are so skewed to the highest levels, and then to see the TAP bell curve, one of the key components of a good evaluation system is to be rigorous and realistic. In South Carolina, for example, they have a statewide system called ADEPT. ADEPT is what they use to evaluate their teachers. Several years ago, 98% of teachers in it's a binary system, 98% of teachers in South Carolina were satisfactory versus unsatisfactory on the ADEPT system. That's not a lot of very good feedback. Whereas when you take a good instrument, but you overlay a very rigorous process, you can really distinguish between, if we're effective, what are our stretch goals to be exemplary? If we're below proficient, what are some things that we can do? Again, going back to those master teachers, what are some things that we can do to be more effective? So again, notice just the bell curve of TAP observations, a realistic picture of instruction versus what we often find are just hyper-inflated examples of teacher evaluation. If we could go to slide 17 for a moment, one of the things that we do in TAP every year is we do anonymous online surveys with all of our teachers. We have now over 400 schools in the TAP system. If you look at, for example, and I know this is probably a little bit difficult to see, but in the middle, instructionally focused accountability, that's our evaluation process. If you look there, what you'll see is 90% of teachers in these schools support this evaluation process. So what I take from that, and semantically I keep referring to it Patrice's evaluation, so I apologize for that, but if you look at the process, teachers are more than willing to be observed and even to be evaluated if there's a support structure to improve and if they believe that the people doing those evaluations know what they're doing. Let me give you an example, and this is not to pick on Louisiana at all, because in Patrice's district, they don't use the statewide system called Compass. But Compass, in order to be certified to use this instrument to evaluate teachers, you go to a one-day training and you sign your name on a sheet of paper that says you attended that one-day training, and you are officially certified to go and observe teachers. That's unacceptable. In TAP, we have 5, 6, 7 days of training where you watch multiple videos, calibrate your scoring for inter-rater reliability and consistency with other evaluators in your school, but also there's an online certification test that you have to pass. And I will say it's a fairly rigorous online certification test. In fact, just to give you some ideas in terms of passage rates, most recently in the state of Texas, our passage rate is around 74%. So that's not a rubber stamp. If you attend training, you're certified and can go do evaluations, but there's a very rigorous online certification test that you have to pass as well. So that's just a little bit about, well, the other thing, Tom, I would add, I spoke about the ideal situation, but I will say that sometimes, even less than ideal situations, we can see a lot of progress and a lot of great things happening. And I'll offer the example of the state of Tennessee. Many of you are familiar with Tennessee and that they were one of the first 2 states, along with Delaware, to receive the first round of the Race to the Top funds. So Tennessee put in a new evaluation system, actually the TAP rubric and the TAP evaluation process in the state. After 1 year of implementation, the state of Tennessee had the highest student growth scores that they've ever had since growth was first calculated in Tennessee in 1992. Now, Tennessee at that point didn't have master teachers and a career ladder, and they didn't have professional development. They were sort of building it a little bit backward as they were going. But point being, if you introduce a rigorous but fair, transparent evaluation system and provide good coaching on the front in terms of pre-conferences and on the back end in terms of post-conferences, you'll see the dial move. And we saw this at the macro level across the state of Tennessee in over 1,500 schools. So again, you have ideal, but even less than ideal, if it's a good evaluation tool, it can still move the dial even at the state level.
Do you have a slide in here about the spread of the TAP and best practice systems?
I do.
You
Slide.
do. I just want to look at that because
Slide 12.
You know, it's true that you can have a really luminescent leader like Yvonne, and people will have so much confidence in her, and she's so resourceful and energetic and positive, and so it can happen among, what do you have, 3,000 students in your schools there? But then how do you do this at scale?
Right.
Yeah, so you want to tell us?
Yeah, and a couple examples. I mentioned Tennessee before, but TAP is the TAP rubrics and that evaluation system. That is the statewide model in the state of Tennessee. So when you look across, that's right at 1 million students in Tennessee every day that are receiving instruction by teachers who are familiar with and who are coached on this rubric. The other thing that I would add, both in Tennessee, but also our work in the state of Ohio, also in the state of Texas, on the right here in the Best Practices Center, is that we've also been able to give the teachers and principals online resources that they can use. One of the things that we realize is that teachers' time is very finite. So the idea of this expansive video library with thousands of hours of instruction, so that's great, but most teachers just frankly don't have the time to first of all go search through and weed through those, or then to sit and watch a 55-minute lesson. So one of the things we've done with these online resources is we've tried to make very, very short and specific training modules so that teachers in these states, Texas, Ohio, Tennessee, Louisiana, and in fact in Patrice's schools as well, are able to very quickly navigate to a very small training module that integrates video and is also adaptive based on the answers that they're giving to some of the questions. But what it's designed to do is in places where there are no master teachers, It's designed to provide a model for how this instruction would look at certain grade levels and in certain content areas.
Can I jump in
Please.
that great leaders still need time, money, and school culture?
Yes.
Okay, so back to, can I have slide 23? So most people believe that charter schools, especially earlier group of us, is we always proceed until we apprehend it, right? So we just do things, okay? Since we have our own funding. So lo and behold, we said, look, so we just get on the trajectory of developing this comprehensive system that married the observation tools with student growth. And of course, we found out they don't validate each other, just like you said. So my goodness, tried it and didn't work. So lo and behold, there came this Consortium of Policy Research in Education. In short, is CPRE. It's made up of 5 universities, Penn U, University of Wisconsin, Madison, Harvard, Stanford, and Michigan State. CPR in education, that's what I thought when I get a call. They said, well, will your school be like, quote, the pilot, along with Rhode Island Daventry, that's where I met John Daisy back in 1998, along with Cincinnati, along with Denver, to see if they validate the teacher evaluation or observation and professional growth actually align with high student academic growth. And bless their heart, they held our hands for 5 years. Go to the website, take a look, and they saw that because we have some flexibility, we're able to have this kind of alignment. This is CP data, more so than the Denver, Cincinnati, and Coventry system. Now, let's talk about time and money. Go to the next slide. We don't have any extra funding. In fact, we receive 95% of non-charter school funding, okay? So how are you gonna pull this off? Well, we can certainly see that our data is very good. We have a lot of categorical money. Look at that, 100%, Title I. So when we saw that kids going to, UCLA, et cetera, we don't have to spend that much money in intervention. We don't have to spend that much money in, teacher grievances and lawsuits. We don't have to spend a lot of money to retain teachers who left and then start all over again. So we said, well, can we pull from this group of money in order that we can provide the time, coming in with substitutes, coming in with retired teachers, coming in with peer reviewers, and free up the teachers for a workshop, and still put $15,000 per person. Now, when you see that, geez, I don't have to pump that much money into things that totally fail all these years.
Right.
It makes a difference. So now, if you go to the last one here, here's the dilemma still, and this is how we kind of been doing it for 15 years, that this whole system will have to phase in very gradually. And I'm glad to see, I believe in LA Unified too, is you start with the brand new hire, okay? Automatically, you're into this system. Then you tweak it and bring in your veterans. Then you tweak it and bring in your administrators and psychologists and so forth. We certainly have to add, I do not know if TAP does it, the teamwork money. Your API, AYP, PI, all those Ps, like in California, how many from California? No, okay. You have all these P, this, P. At school, you're always being P'd at, just tired of it, So why don't we just, okay, if we make a teamwork growth, the school-wide, so we load 35% of the money into teamwork, including graduation rate. And then individually is through the calibration, and I'm glad that one you talk about it, is that we make sure that all the peer reviewers and administrators, department chair, everybody's in sync in terms of how you do the evaluation, and that document is absolutely fluid. I mean, we change it every 2-3 years because right now there's more things to come. What we have to see in the horizon of major good opportunities is the Common Core. Okay?
Absolutely.
With the Common Core, where science teachers, social study teachers also have to teach literacy. So literacy is a team approach. It's a team incentive. It's a team rubric. We also see that the new generation of assessment that can be adaptive, that you can add the benchmarking. Right now, we do every 8 weeks benchmarking. Teachers benchmark the exponent, okay, lesson. So maybe with this technology, the adaptive devices, we can do this benchmark assessment better. Now, this is a global conference. You're looking at global, I won't say economy, it's global connectedness, interconnectedness that gives that opportunity as China, Israel, they're all looking into effective teachers. They all look at quality. Why couldn't we just go across education, crossing the border, and be able to kind of do something that is substantially good for the whole world? And of course, technology help. I'm glad to hear. I really want to see the stuff. And then the last push, the fifth push, is the teacher prep. The university be to get their acts together in getting the teachers. Now, the last dilemma we have not solved, and this warrant to you, school culture. I've been Los Angeles Unified Principal before. Teacher. Somehow I just do not know why. As much as we say we want to work as a team, honestly, the minute you become a school administrator, you kind of, the line drawn in the sand. Evaluator, evaluatee. It just, somehow we have to break that particular barrier, that we are all there for kids and try to have a win-win situation. It is not me against you. It is not I'm trying to catch you, whatever. In my 42 years, I mean, honestly, I've seen only a very few teachers that need to be counseled out, but they still end up to be a good teacher in China. I mean, ESL, I don't mean that, but that's their calling. But meanwhile, many teachers who are burned out or administrators, once you have a system in place that they can buy into, that they know that they have a say in making the change. And we are born again. We are born again. And teachers that absolutely burned out or developing, we have to put teachers in developmental level and keep saying kids on developmental level, but we never treat teacher with that type of a developmental level so that you can take them from the 3 to a 4 to a 5. Well, anyway.
So I want to come to Warren, and then I'll come back to you,
Sure.
Patrice. And this is, you have a professional political organization. That
Yes.
is, your members vote for you, they vote for all of their leaders.
Yes.
And you have a history of this kind of divide, not just you, but in most school districts actually that I've been in around the country. Between you could say management and labor, or teachers and administrators. And I think the larger the district, the more likely that is to happen. And so I'm just thinking of it like, let's say Jerry Brown and Barack Obama come and say, Warren, what do you need to make this work? The teacher effectiveness system. What is it that would cause the union to be enthusiastic about it?
Well, remember that there are a couple of professions that are unionized professions that we really have to, we're a little bit different. And the two classic ones would be nurses and teachers, which is we are, in our roles, in our employment roles, we're very much employees. And so that's the reason that nurses and teachers, these are also both professions that historically have been female dominated. And I use the word dominated with a capital D in the sense that they were also professions that where there were a lot of mistreatment by management over the many decades. So that's one of the reasons that those two professions, but the distinction about our two professions is that we're both about practice. We're both, you can't go to a group of teachers or a group of nurses and just say, we're the union, if the boss gets your paycheck wrong, we'll file a grievance, or if, whatever, so work rule sort of stuff. We have to provide that, but at the same time, if you're either a teachers union or a nurses union, or there's a couple of other fields, if you're in those fields, they don't expect the union just to say those sort of boss and labor things. They also want the union to be talking about how we can better serve our clientele, which is to say students and parents, how we can improve instruction, how we can basically move the profession forward. So we always have to come at it with that. We have to have that dual focus, and it is true. It's sometimes very difficult because I want to cite one slide that I hadn't thought of this before, but it was the slide number 18, where you talked about the low, medium, high rates. And I hadn't thought about this before, but the red bars, I realized what that is similar to. And that would be the outcome of the driver's test you take at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Because very few people fail the driver's test at the Department of Motor Vehicles. The system is basically, when you go to the DMV, it's a compliance activity. And when you leave, I could pass. It's entirely possible that we could give the test in Braille, and that a person who could not see could pass the driver's test, and then they could go, and that would not tell us whether they were competent to drive a car or not. And I hadn't thought of that till that analogy. Evaluation systems, and Yvonne made a perfect point. The way that the STUL evaluation system has rolled out over the years here in California, it has devolved to a compliance activity. And when it's a compliance activity, you're going to get a curve that looks like that. And what I spoke originally about was the idea of using, whether you call it evaluation or effectiveness or student growth, whatever you call it, you need to have a system that improves people. No one ever went and took their driver's test and was a better driver, gained anything in driving from taking that driver's test. We have to move away from compliance models, because when you have compliance models, Yvonne, if you gave me a below standard stall, I will say, but I complied with everything. And we're not even having a conversation about how you can help me get better or how I can show you what I'm doing in my classroom.
We're going to have to sort of wrap up here. Patrice, I want you, you had something on your mind to say, but also anything you could say about whether Common Core is going to get in the way or facilitate or be neutral on this.
Sure. A couple of things I want to talk about. One is, and Common Core plays right into this, one thing that I think is imperative that Yvonne alluded to is that we should be looking at teacher observation data and student data, and we should be seeing some alignment across that. So in our district, we will look at quarterly benchmark data right next to teacher observation data. And when we see misalignment, then we want to investigate what's happening there and see why is that happening. And so, those measures should actually align and lay out. Sometimes I think when you see misalignment from state assessment and teacher observation, it's because we don't always in our state assessment assess the things that we really value. Many of our state assessments right now are very knowledge-based, yet we're moving to Common Core state standards, which are much more conceptual, a much deeper critical thinking base. And so occasionally we'll find a teacher who kind of drills and kills and gets poor observation, but might get high value added because the test is testing out a knowledge base. I think as we look at these evaluation systems or teacher effectiveness systems moving forward with Common Core state standards, that alignment, the value of the national testing will be the alignment of this is what we say we need to teach, this is our measurement of that very thing, and then we can have more confidence in the value-added scoring and the alignment of those two pieces. I think that Common Core state standards will not in any way be implemented without strong teacher effective systems. There is no way we are going to be able to raise the bar on complexity of text, on more rigorous concepts at lower grades, if we are not at the same time being extremely reflective about how to improve our practice and how to assure that every single student can meet those more rigorous challenges. And so I think the two go hand in hand, and that we absolutely will be unsuccessful with Common Core if we do not institute these kinds of teacher effectiveness systems.
Thank you. I just got the signal that we have to wrap up here. I want to thank our panel. Let's give them a nice round of applause. And just kind of end on the note that I think there's a tremendous amount of potential here as long as we keep in mind the goal of student success, of having teachers succeed at the model and like it. And we keep in mind that it's a system. It's just not about the chart that Yvonne started us on where you get down to 1 mark. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day. I love that.